All right, there we go. And we're live. Georgios, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show.
Great to have you also, and thanks for participating.
And maybe just to give a quick introduction, let's say about your background and let's say the experience that you bring to the table. Of course, a lot of the topics will be based around that. If there's anything I miss, feel free to correct me or feel free to add extra information. But so Georgios Kabitoglou, I hope I pronounced that correct.
You pronounce it very well, and you're one of the few people that actually managed it.
Okay. And it's Greek background, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Greece.
Okay. So that's going to be interesting as well, given that you have a very, let's say, you weren't born in Germany, so you bring that, the two different cultures. So back to the intro, you're a CEO, you're an investor, advisor, and you're a newly appointed senator at the Senat der Wirtschaft. We can get into this later on as well. You've spent decades leading high-impact companies in telecom, manufacturing, technology. Seems like a big focus for you was scaling sales teams, driving M&A, and just transforming traditional businesses, let's say, into more innovative companies. And recently, of course, you stepped into a more public-facing role with this Senate appointment. So I'd love to get into this as well. And today we kind of agreed to discuss what are some of the biggest challenges facing, let's say, small and medium-sized companies in Germany, specifically around digitization, and maybe with your political involvement going forward, what could be some interesting policy changes and ideas that could make a difference in the businesses in the country. So is there anything there that I missed that you think is important to add?
No, that's fine. I think these are the right topics to talk about these days. And actually, they've been pretty important since quite some years. But these days, specifically this year, it's absolutely crucial to talk about this openly and also actually act upon them.
And we have interesting times right now happening all over the world. We got trade tariffs, we got competition with China, we got competition with AI. So a lot of stuff happening. And I know you've also traveled to China, so I'm excited to get into your thoughts and your impressions of that as well. But maybe let's start with your business background a little bit. Could you give us an idea, let's say, of what you did in your career? Maybe what are the biggest lessons so far that you learned?
As I said before, I was born and raised in Greece, so it's a southern country with very open people. Also, learning to express your emotions more openly and have also very deep relationship with people, irrespective if this are friends or employees. I moved over to Germany when I was 17 and a half. I studied electrical engineering at the Technical University of Munich and lived also there for 29 years. And since a couple of years, I've moved back to Greece privately, but my business, let's say, center is still Germany, where I commute every week. My career, I've been in multiple companies, might it be small or bigger ones, might it be publicly listed or privately owned. So it's been a bit of a collection of many, let's say, how can I say, many
a range of different
numeric forms of corporations. Almost in every position I've been in a sales role or a commercial role. So let's say scaling and getting a commercial success has always been the focus of my doing. Went over there afterwards to a telecom business, and that's where I really scaled more on a global level. Then I went over to a company which was my first private equity touch point, which was in the explosion-proof business. So also there, very exciting being in the oil and gas business, which was a primary contact point from the customer side. Afterwards, I was in faucets, taps, so sanitary business, which is a completely different ball game. And ultimately, since 2000, I've been leading Möster Group, and Möster Group is also a portfolio company of private equity, in this case, Hannover Finanz. It's a small company, but being in the private equity arena, of course, with a very dynamic target setting and also, of course, goals.
Mm-hmm. And, if somebody's listening to this and they might hear that completely different industries, different sizes of companies, sometimes different geographical locations, what are maybe some of the lessons that you learn, or what helped you achieve success across these completely different fields? Or what are the biggest takeaways that helped you succeed in those areas?
Well, let's start with, let's say, selecting the companies. And if you look at what the companies have been doing, you would say there is no redlining and in the choice that I've made from employer to employee. This is true, but on the other side, I always try to, bring myself in a certain uncertainty when it comes to the next step, because that's where you actually have the biggest learnings. And in any case, if you become an expert in commercialization, that's what I always, let's say, aim to call myself, and to be able to define better business models. I think this is always a common denominator, because it doesn't matter what business you're selling or you're trying to scale, the basic principles of performance achievement and globalization and so on remain the same. And you, of course, have different parameters that you have to deal with. But ultimately, it always comes down to a business proposition and, of course, leadership. And this is actually one of the most important topics that have always defined my career, how to be able to be, let's say, good performing leader in order to make a performance transition in the organization. Because you never everything yourself, logically. You're responsible for setting a target, motivating people to work towards a certain target. And I think that's a core role that leadership takes in such situations, right?
So there's quite a bit that you mentioned there. One thing was commercializing. That's kind of part of your success. That it seems a big focus for you was driving sales, always being in sales-focused roles. And the second part that stood out is that obviously you cannot do all the sales in a company yourself. You have to empower other people. You have to lead them. So are there any things that when it comes to sales or leading, let's say, sales teams, that maybe seem obvious to you now with so much experience, but you're noticing that other companies that maybe you're investing in or companies that you're advising are not doing that initially?
Well, I think it has to do a lot with performance culture. So, I mean, it sounds like something that everybody said at some point of their life, but this customer centricity is very important. When I went to Mercer Group, I wrote something like I called 10 Commandments, and it was the best way I could communicate to the people how they should behave with each other and towards peers and also towards stakeholders. And the first commandment was that sales is not a department, sales is a state of mind. And with that, what I wanted to state is that sometimes, everybody says, okay, it's a customer, so it's a sales department. But if you think and you're customer centric and everybody in the company decides how they're going to work and perform on the basis that there is a customer out there that's, let's say, feeding us all or can fire us all, then the whole state of mind and the way that you perform is different. And well-performing organizations versus non-performing are the ones that lose or have the customer in focus, and also the proposition that the company is trying to sell to the customer base, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is a very important topic to always have in mind. And you need basically in the leadership skill set that you have, not just on the CEO level, but on all the leadership levels in the company, they all need to foster this meaning and to foster this behavioral pattern and make sure that everybody is driving towards that goal and working towards that goal.
Mm-hmm. So would you mean by that, let's say that sales is not just the sales team's effort, but when you're doing customer service or onboarding or support for the customers, you're still approaching it with, let's say, that service mindset that you might have a repeat customer, you might upsell the customer in the long term. So not focusing just on getting the sale and signing on the dotted line, but kind of providing the whole package as a company?
I mean, everybody, the performance of an organization is the sum of the performance of its people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if everybody is performing in the right mode, automatically the company will outperform other competitors. You might be in an R&D department, you might be in the procurement department, which has nothing, let's say, holistically to do with sales, but still, if you perform in that department, if you always think that if you do your job well, that the customer will ultimately see that. Either you procure much better, you have a very good supply chain, the products are more innovative, you make your internal deadlines, and so on and so on. You are cut the costs on a better level, or you are more efficient in marketing. The company will outperform other companies in that field, and ultimately you will become successful and scale. So basically, performance comes also from within and from the people that are striving to make the company successful on an everyday basis, reaching daily milestones, not just the big ticket items, but also the everyday targets that they have to do and take care of.
And you're actually the second business lead I heard give that example, that is like the sum total of all the efforts of the whole team. I think Elon Musk had a similar saying, that somebody asked him, like, what do you attribute the success of a company? And he basically said something along the lines of, it's the sum vector of all of your basically employees and whether that's aligned or not. And if you think about it like an arrow, right? So different people might have a different capacity. Somebody's arrow might be level 2, somebody's might be level 6. But it's about aligning it all rather than pulling in opposite directions and getting nowhere, let's say.
I mean, talking about quotes, the quote that really got me at some point of time in that direction, I think came from Richard Branson. And he always said that you don't build a business, you build people, and people build a business. My example when I talk about organizations is the example about how do you magnetize a rod of iron, of ferrite. So basically what you do is you take another magnet and you strike over it many, many times. And this basically aligns the whole, atoms in that direction. And this actually causes the magnetization. So basically a company that is not aligned does not have this magnetic capability. And for me, the magnet that goes over the whole organization is leadership. So you manage to make everybody look towards the right direction and perform in the right direction by having exercising correct leadership, motivational leadership, transformational leadership, and all that things that factor into that, in order to be able to create a performing vector, as Elon would probably say that, in order to increase their organization. Otherwise, if people are working against each other, even without knowing it, then you will never reach the performance that you actually want to reach.
I really like the magnet example, because if you think of the leader of the company, somebody still has to do the initial, let's say, aligning in the right direction or magnetizing, as you said, in the right direction. Maybe one more question on this note. So leadership, of course, a big topic in this area as well. How do you lead, or what's your leading style? Is it leading by example and everybody else adopts that mindset watching you? Or what's your philosophy on leading teams?
I mean, obviously, you have to walk the talk. So, just preaching and doing in a different way yourself. It's like if you're having children, they will not do what you tell them. They will do what they see ultimately, and how you behave yourself. So, walking the talk and also be consistent how you behave towards people and actually expect them and put yourself and measure yourself on the highest bar possible than what you measure each and every employee is very important. Second topic for me is transparent communication of your goals, of how you judge people, what you expect from them. And I think what wraps it up ultimately is very clear feedback when it comes to good performance, also bad performance. So very often people don't even know they're doing something wrong unless you tell them. But if you tell them, it doesn't help if you just tell them you're bad. This is, let's say, sometimes this high environment mentality that you see in the States is not the best way to go. For me, if somebody is not performing, you have to sit down together and explain to him what you see. And I truly believe that every person, no person comes into their job every morning and says, today I want to do a bad job. So even if the people have, let's say, are doing this, it's because they internally quit and they're not interested anymore in becoming a good version of themselves. But it always feels better to perform and get positive feedback on one's performance. So if you give people the chance and the good feedback of how they can excel and give them the time and the tools to do so, I think most of the time, at least in my experience, they really appreciate that and really try to become a better version of themselves. So feedback culture is also very important in a company, and not just, waiting for them to do a mistake. And final point on that, it's also, let's say, the error culture. And this is also a cultural topic that is specifically in Germany actually not that well, let's say, established. Making a mistake in German culture very often is considered bad thing. The best thing is if you don't make any mistakes, then you're good. But actually, you cannot learn unless you make mistakes. So this let's say a mistake tolerant culture is very important, because if somebody makes a mistake and he honestly wants to become better, he understands why he made the mistake, and he learns out of this experience, then for sure, if you give him a chance to become better, he will become much better because he appreciates this process.
Mm. Yeah, I like that philosophy. It's almost, again, how you compare it to children in a way that you want to, I guess, praise and encourage the positive behavior when it happens and re-emphasize that rather than publicly criticize when they make a mistake and make them feel bad.
Yes.
And on the note as well, you said about making mistakes. One of my former bosses, it was back in Australia. One of the employees basically messed up a deal, and it was a pretty bad mistake, and they lost $80,000 as a result of that. They lost the customer, and everybody was convinced that he's going to fire that person. But then the next day, she still showed up to work like nothing happened. And when we asked him in private, what's the reason you didn't let go of this person? He's like, well, I just spent $80,000 training her, so why would I let her go? I mean, that's the money I'm invested in this team member. She's going to earn me many multiples in the future. So,
but we had, by the way, an employee who lost us €500,000.
Oh wow!
A couple of years ago. But I mean, she signed something she shouldn't have signed, and this is, let's say, brought us in a very vulnerable position with the stopping of an order. And she's still on board, and she's performing excellently. But when something like that happens, I mean, sometimes people do mistakes, and no matter what you do, it's just human error. But in this case, then you have to look whether also management could have installed processes or trained this person better so that this mistake could have been avoided. And actually, the reason why she's still on board is because our processes in that area where she made the mistake were not good enough. So what we did, we improved the processes, and this person expected us to fire her, but we didn't, because we said we want to give you a chance, but we also want to become better ourselves. So this has also worked, and this is also everybody's looking, specifically on a C-level. Everybody's looking at how you behave and what your behavioral pattern is in such situations. And this is also a very important way of forming a culture on how you treat people that do make mistakes.
I'll have to reflect on that a little bit more after. If you don't mind, let's switch it up a little bit. And you mentioned about the culture in Germany and not making mistakes. Maybe that's also limiting some companies, some people from taking risks that potentially have high rewards. So obviously lately the economy is not doing that great. There's many different factors. We've got wars, we've got terrorists, we got a lot of things happening. What would you attribute to, let's say, the current economic struggles in Germany?
You mean what is the reason for the struggles right now?
Yeah, especially a lot of companies, like you see the automotive sector and a lot of other companies laying off people, letting go of employees. So what would you say are the biggest?
I mean, it's a mix, obviously. For sure, there is a lot of reshuffling of the cards right now. So when big technology changes come, like in automotive now with electric vehicles, they are bound to be winners and losers. I mean, Europe has dominated the, let's say, combustion market for many years when it comes to, let's say, technology and innovation. There are some, external factors that you cannot control, like the war in the Ukraine. But in principle, for sure, I believe that Germany has, let's say, relaxed a bit and rested too much on the achievements of the past. So there are a couple of companies that did not take some changes that were coming serious enough. On the other side, I have to say, Germans typically tend to be more negative than necessary. Meaning that, it's very easy to say, Germany, you can write it off. Germany is not innovative anymore. Germany is down and so on and so on. But I honestly believe that Germany is still, it is still the third largest economy. with 80 million people in relation to US with something like 340 million, and China which is 1.4 billion. So it's there up high on the top three. I think it has fantastic innovation, and if you go and look a bit of the structure of the companies, it's not very big conglomerates that dominate the market, but it's a gazillion small and mid-sized companies that have managed to become very, very unique in the product portfolio that they're selling, and also leaders in many areas. So I think there is still a lot for Germany to give to the world. And I think this shakeup is something like an alarm clock that needs to be heard, and people need to wake up. And if this happens, I mean, there are good reasons for it to happen, but there is still a lot of activity needed for it to materialize. I think that Germany has still a brilliant future ahead of it.
And I like that you're keeping an optimistic, let's say, worldview, because I do believe Germany has a lot of great things to offer as well, as you mentioned. You also said that there's some, obviously, hurdles they need to overcome, maybe to take it to the next level or to bring it back to the heights. And in our previous chat, we talked about digitization, AI. So yeah, what are some of those challenges that you see that companies have to really overcome in a short period of time to take that next step?
Yeah, I think I always try to give the example of my home country, Greece. Greece was in the news the last 10, 15 years because of its very bad economic situation. Also in Greece, we had very bad or lack of reforms. And the last 5 to 6 years, basically, we have made giant leaps in digitalization. So specifically also the government efficiency, the things that you can do when you transact with the state are all very, very well digitalized in one platform. So basically the state is an app, to make a long story short. I think the first country in Europe that went that path was Estonia. And I think we're following that example very, very closely. And today, 98% of what I have to do as a citizen with the state, the interaction is digital. It's basically in the browser. This is one very big thing because Germans are not always very fond of digital stuff. And I think this is rooted very, very much into this misbelief of privacy, which brings me to the next step, which is GDPR. And this is not just a German thing, but a European thing. I do value privacy for sure. And if you look at other countries where there's no privacy at all, then I might rather be in an area where my privacy is respected. But you can also overdo it. And I think this is something that is slowly sinking in Germany, but also on the EU level, that this GDPR whole thing is, let's say, not allowing innovation to continue. And it's putting one hurdle on top of the other when it comes to businesses. Also AI. I mean, now this is for sure more in the focus. But if you look at the areas the areas of this world where AI will most probably thrive, are the areas where it has also a lot of, let's say, way and room and space to grow. And the problem in Europe and also in Germany specifically is overregulation. So for me, it is very important to keep a tab on what is very important, the key topics about privacy, freedom of speech, and so on and so on and so on. But at some point of time, you need to allow innovation to happen, and innovation cannot be controlled always. It needs to, expand uncontrollably at some point of time. Yeah. And then, of course, you need to have some basic principles, but you cannot control every step of the way when you go there. So AI is a topic, and AI basically is very important for Germany because specifically in industrialized countries, it can massively optimize efficiency. So, and again, inherently, Germany views this more as a risk than as an opportunity, at least on a political level. On a normal corporation level, yes, we are introducing AI tools, and I think that it will become more and more. But predominantly still, countries outside of Europe are the ones who are now giving much more focus on that. And finally, also capital. So I'm also involved in startups. And I was asking myself what would happen, because now the new government has committed 1 billion, so 1 trillion, sorry,
Mhm.
1,000 billion, split between infrastructure and defense. So I was just saying, if you took, let's say, a couple of 100 billion of that, and just linearly gave each startup in Germany right now, irrespective of the success or of the phase that they're in, whether they're pre-series, post-series, and so on, just on the basis of how many people they have, meaning their size, give them, divide the 200 billion in funding, and give them. In 3 or 5 years' time, how many unicorns you will get out of this. So it's basically just watering the soil as much as possible without
Yeah.
asking what is your risk, what is your reward, what is your pitch deck, what is your whatever. Because in Germany, startups have their high risk venture, right? And specifically in the US, for example, if you look like big names like Sequoia Capital and so on, they know how to get along with risks. They know how to value, and they know how that some of them will work, some of them will not work, and some will become unicorns.
Mm.
And in Germany, this does not work. In Germany, people are too much afraid to make a mistake by investing somewhere, and thus the people that might have become something actually never become something because they lack funding. And, I don't know, 50-60% of the startups go bust within the first 3 or 5 years of operations. So for me, also getting innovation means that you have access to risk capital, which in Germany at this point of time is for me very, very difficult to access.
And what you're saying almost sounds like the model used by Y Combinator, if I'm not mistaken, in the States. Was like one of the biggest, let's say, hubs for promoting startups and helping them get to market. And yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, they're whenever they make an investment, they have some kind of a deal that if your company succeeds and it reaches a certain valuation or certain return, then they get a percentage back from their investment. But if they fail, it's kind of like no major punishment or no major repercussions for the founding team, because oftentimes the same guys are going to go on to found a second, third, fourth company. Eventually, one of them is going to be successful. So
Yeah.
that kind of brings me into the next set of questions I had for you, which would be, what would be some policy changes aside from the one you just proposed that, let's say if you got a magic wand, you're working in the government and you can implement some policy changes to help these small, medium-sized businesses, what else would you do that you think would have the biggest outsized impact?
Well, I think it's a combination. First of all, the whole topic about supply chain. Supply chain, the law for supply chain control that has been in the European Union, plus of course the topic of GDPR. So on a conceptual level, has to be changed and made much more, let's say, much more
Business
livable
friendly.
or much more implementable. In principle, ESG, or the general purpose of becoming more sustainable, I think is fine. But I also think that the larger the companies become, the more they have to report until the very end, the very detail what they're doing. And I think also a very good principle of sustainable business owning and business conducting has again become overregulated in the way that people companies should implement it, and very costly. I mean, for example, if you are obliged to have an ESG reporting, I mean, I know big corporations that have 15 people just doing this 300-page report every year, and these people have to get information from all the subsidiaries around the world and the suppliers and so on and so on. And we get
Right.
also a lot of questionnaires, even we're a small company, about what our sustainability strategy is. On the other side, we are not yet, as a Möchter Group, we are not yet under this must umbrella because of our size. But we still, from our own motivation, since 3 years, are publishing an ESG report. It's just 15, 20 pages long. But it's really important for us because it summarizes all our efforts around these 3 basic pillars: environmental, social, and governance. And why not allow the people and motivate them to make certain reporting, but without having it to be 300 pages long, with all that it means, with the content, right? And the final topic, you can have regulations, but a regulation is only a burden if it cannot be, let's say, met efficiently. And that brings me again back to digitalization. If you have regulations, but the regulations are a digital process which you can really control, not only with a push of a button, but it's a very efficient process, digitalized, then it's okay. Then you have no problem for that. And there are other countries in the world, also in Europe, that are much more regulated, but are much more efficient because they can do this digitally. So for me, it's not just working on the regulation front, but also pushing digitalization to make also these processes much more efficient.
And I think you're already kind of speaking it into existence. I was just sharing an article the other day on LinkedIn that basically the EU is cutting down some of their GDPR requirements, and they're planning to, let's say, ease some of those requirements. And obviously, previously you were talking about AI. There's billions and billions committed already to building AI factories. I believe we're going to have 2 of them in Germany as well. So it's pretty exciting to see that, like you're right, that it is a wake-up call to Europe, to Germany, to actually start taking these matters seriously, not to fall behind. I was going to ask you another important question when it comes to startups, especially. What do we do about taxes? I mean, we can't avoid taxes, but the tax rate in Germany, arguably some of the highest. So especially for a lot of startups, you just get your first few customers. You had a bunch of co-founders that are maybe underpaying themselves. So would you try to implement any rebates or any kind of special benefits for startups to ease the tax burden?
I mean, this is you can see it from multiple views, but it all comes down to what is the net money that is left after everything to be able to fund innovation. So you can solve it on the taxation level, saying you don't need to pay taxes on your income, blah, blah, blah. Or if you hire employees, you get a better tax break when employing them with social costs and so on. Or you get more funding and you don't care about the rest. So it doesn't always have to be less taxes. If a startup is getting, it needs 300K to live, and it just does 200K, if it cuts taxes on the net, it can survive. If it gets the 300K, it pays the taxes, and everything is peachy. So for me, with startups, it's all about having the risk capital in order for you to be able, as a startup CEO, to fund your MVP and go and ultimately reach, hopefully, Series A at some point and have some good recurring revenue that can sustain your growth. So I wouldn't just say only focus on the tax issue, but generally on the financing issue. That would be much more important from what I've seen in the startups that I've invested in.
That again sounds a little bit similar to what Elon is doing with Dodge, with the Department of Government Efficiency nowadays, that the U.S. debt and the interest, the payments on the debt are so high that there's only so much you can do to reduce it. You can make a dent, but I think something like $9 trillion just in interest payments per year. But what he tries to focus on as well is maybe some form of deregulation to unlock productivity, because you can basically outgrow this debt by increasing the GDP, by bringing in more revenue. Would you share that philosophy in a way?
That's a long story when you come to talk about the U.S. these days. I mean, U.S. is the largest economy, not because there are a lot of people, but they had for many, many years this performance mantra and innovative mantra of how to deal with new stuff coming and how to make it work. So it's still for me, let's say the U.S. in principle is still for me one of the most successful industrial countries in the last century, right? Of course, they have had their ups and downs. Of course, they have also, let's say, dwelled on success for a very long time. And there are also other models in other countries, China, for example, that you mentioned before, that are also picking up the pace, also becoming extremely innovative, and also learn how speed matters. And suddenly there's more, let's say, more competition in the field, and competition is always welcome because typically the best idea wins. But of course, if you were the winner for the last 50 or 100 years, it's not an easy task for you to start to become defensive and let's say regain that momentum.
Mm.
And of course, there is a lot of things in the states that need to change. Also, their reforms are necessary. If you look at the financials of the country, I mean, it's basically broke. And had it not been America with a fantastic rating, this country in every other part of the world would have not
Would have
existed
been bankrupt by now.
financially
Yeah.
anymore. So, and this is the opposite of Germany. Germany has been, always saving money, never giving up, don't take any risks. And I think their GDP ratio of lending is something around 66% or so. And if even with this trillion that they're now going to take and put into the markets, this does not change significantly the financial, let's say, credibility situation of Germany. That's why I always say Germany has a fantastic buffer of time, because you can only buy time with money in order to create reforms, in order to create products. And there's still so much good going on in Germany to just write off the country and say that was it, the experiment didn't work. So I believe that if we do some things right the next couple of years, that a new, let's say, renaissance might be coming.
Well, I hope that comes true, and I'm definitely optimistic with you on that. This kind of brings me to the next point, that your recent appointment as senator. So, maybe just to clarify to the audience, not like the Senate, like United States, like the legislative branch, but it's more of a private organization, if I'm not mistaken, which is apolitical, which provides, let's say, policy suggestions and advice to the government.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, basically, the Senate of Economy is roughly 700 individuals like myself. It's an organization where you are, let's say, proposed. You do not apply for it. And it's something like a bridge between the industry and the real world and in politics. And because these two have to coexist and have to interact with each other, and politicians have to create, let's say, the environment for businesses to thrive, it is very important that they get the right feedback of what is really needed, because typically politicians from their career point of view are not people that have gone through, decades of working in companies and corporations, and then suddenly at some point of time they become politicians. They have always strived to be in this political arena, and
Career
a lot of them are
politicians.
lawyers and so on. So there is not always deep knowledge on the corporate level. And I think that organizations like the Senate of Economy are there in order to support governments and politicians to understand what are the next steps that need to happen. And politicians have multiple channels where they interact with corporations and with the industry. And of course, this is one of them. It's a very high quality, very, let's say, dense know-how. And I think the people that have founded it are doing a fantastic job in order to be able to support the political world and arena with good feedback. And I'm really honored to be part of that.
And it seems like you're in the stage of your life where you're focusing maybe a bit more on giving back, whether it's to companies, startups, young people, and of course, with this appointment as well. So what do you hope to accomplish in this position? What would be something that, let's say, in 5-10 years, you look back and you say, I'm really proud that I was able to accomplish this in some way?
Well, it's not by far that I'm some guy like Elon and I will change the world by founding 5 unique companies. But I think if everybody tries a bit to support, and if everybody puts his small mark somewhere where he can, with his feedback, with his efforts, with his energy, then the whole thing has a chance to become better. And in my view, my feedback, my knowledge, my view from the smaller corporations that I've been privileged to lead, or mid-sized corporations where I was in the management, might support, and I hope that it supports the whole process in the next couple of years, because now these days it's much more dynamic. So if everything was running smoothly, then you just keep the steering wheel straight. But now there is an elk where you have to move out, there is a pothole and where you have to evade and so on. So in these situations, people need to communicate much more. It's like when a company is in crisis, you have to hold town hall meetings. You have to talk to people that understand where they're going. If you need to make a change in direction rapidly, you have to inform much more. And my small role in this whole Germany ecosystem is to contribute as much as I can to help people understand better what we need to do in order to become better.
Yeah, I like that. And something you said last time we spoke on the phone was that you think governments would be run much better if business people were in charge rather than career politicians. And I want to ask you on this. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Please ask your question.
Yeah, I was going to ask, we see like in the US, maybe, career politicians took over the government a little bit too much, where they're stifling innovation in some way. Now we see this entrepreneurs and business people being appointed, let's say, by the new president, whether you like him or not, but you see a lot more business people being in charge. Then we have China, which is, let's say, using a different approach, and they have a lot of engineers who are being assigned into positions of power. What do you think, what would be your approach? Would it be purely business? Would it be engineering? Would it be a mix? Because it seems like a lot of, let's say, even authoritarian regimes are outperforming the democracies nowadays.
I think that, again, I would not say authoritarian or non-authoritarian, democratic or not, because even democratic regimes sometimes are very authoritarian. Recent examples you can find. So for me, it's about, sometimes you can say an authoritarian regime is like this magnet, is a CEO. When I say that, it goes in the right direction. So decisions can be made much faster. And with that, the speed is very important for innovation and reaching a target. In principle, I really appreciate when there's a good mix of knowledge and backgrounds. So if you just have, career politicians doing things, then they just want to get reelected, have maybe no real jobs in real life, and that's it. So it's like a self-sustaining thing, which does not focus on performance. And I think you need career politicians because they have a certain longevity. They know how to, persuade people on a broad mass, set targeting, and so on. But you need also some engineers. You need some business people. You need some people that are really on the performing side of society, on the producing side of society, to support them make the pragmatic approaches. And if you see, for example, also like how good China is performing right now, and if you've been to China, I've been a couple of times to China in the last 15 years, many times, it's unbelievable what leaps of productivity and performance this country is doing in many fields. And the quality of life for an average Chinese person has increased dramatically the last 10, 15 years. So the system is working, in my view. And for me, of course, there are ups and downs and lefts and rights, and I don't think we need to go onto the negative sides. But in principle, there are things to learn there. And I believe that some sort of a best practice out of all these different countries would be a really interesting, let's say, mix to adopt, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've spent quite some time in China as well. As we discussed before, I was working in the semiconductor industry as well, and it's crazy. You go to Shenzhen, you go to some of these cities, it's like you can't even compare that to again, not to detract Europe, USA, and so on, but they're able to construct skyscrapers in a short period of time. If there's some kind of a, some kind of a disaster, natural disaster, just the speed and the efficiency with which they can get it done. So I definitely like the idea that balancing.
Take EVs. I mean, there are currently, I think in China, over 100 companies building cars, names you have never heard before. We know, of course, of BYD. We know of two or three bigger ones, right? But what happens is you foster that small companies start building EVs. Some of them will end up in a junkyard because they go bankrupt. But out of 100 companies where you have pushed for innovation, you will then at some point start distilling the whole ecosystem, and maybe 10 or 15 companies which are really good and are the best of breed of all these 100 will actually become top-notch companies like BYD. And for me, this is a very important part because they're getting funding. EV is a priority of the government. They're putting risk capital in that, supporting that. And that's why you see companies developing. And this is something that every company or every country that has an agenda, and in China they have an agenda, and the agenda is pushed thoroughly and correctly into the organizations. Everybody knows what it is. It's communicated. It's public knowledge. And thus everybody knows in which direction it has to go. And the agenda is in order to make the country in overall be most prosperous. So it's a good target back there, right?
Yeah, well, I like everything you're preaching. I definitely hope to see a lot more innovation, a lot more funding for companies, deregulation to some extent, but still maintaining those, let's say, pillars of European culture in general about privacy, about quality of life. So I'm very excited to see people like you actually step in those positions to bridge business and politics. Is there any other last takeaway or advice for potentially entrepreneur startups, people working in small, medium-sized businesses in tech that, any parting words for the audience?
I would just say optimism is very important. So people tend to always view risk more intensely, and because it creates fear, and fear is a very powerful inhibitor when it comes to doing things. I think self-consciousness, knowing where you're good at, knowing your roots, knowing your competencies is very important. And if you look positively in the future, you automatically attract, if you have another energy, you automatically attract positive stuff to happen to you. So for me, it's very important to become and remain very optimistic. And of course, we need to work now. It's now the part where nothing happens because we just look at it. So you need to take charge of your own life, of your own country, of your own business, of your own corporation, and make it work, and have a performance culture. And I think this is very important from let's say, the 70, 80 years old who have taken us through the whole industrialization area. I'm in the middle somewhere, but also young people need to understand that performance is still a key for them becoming and getting a pension at some point of time. So optimism and performance, let's say, would be the two things that I would like to give some as parting words in this discussion.
Well, I think that's a good way to end it, Georgios. Thank you again one more time, and really appreciate your time. Look forward to see what you can help us do, let's say, with your guidance in the economy.
Thanks a lot.
Until next time, and hopefully we get to do this again a couple of years down the line.
Anytime. Thanks a lot.